what I was, well, it really is part of describing the course. I was talking a little bit about what cognitive psychology is, just to give you some kind of rough idea of what we're going to be covering in here. Did that mainly looking through the syllabus. Something I want to do today first is give you an idea. The general public has, in the last 5 or 10 years, become really interested in cognitive psychology. It's become like a fad. And there have been dozens of popular books on it. Some of them really quite good, some of them really quite awful. I want to describe a few of them to you, just so you know, well, just as another way to introduce the topic. One of the most interesting topics, not necessarily totally the best book, but one of the most interesting topics was medical decision making, medical diagnosis. That started out in cognitive psychology as kind of a big deal. Physicians kind of took it over, and you see a lot about physician decision making in medical journals now, as well as in cognitive journals. But this was one of the first books on that. The guy, I think, is an oncologist, a cancer specialist, maybe at Harvard. But anyway, he does a really decent job of reviewing the research on medical thinking and medical decision making, which is right down our alley. We won't get to this kind of thing until the second half of the course, but it'll be a big part of the course. Thinking and decision making in general, not just doctoring. You know, most people, when you hear about a doctor not being any good or making lots of mistakes or stuff like that, everybody thinks it's, well, you know, they haven't kept up with the journals, they've gotten lazy since they got out of medical school and just don't know what's going on. It turns out research shows that's not it. That's not what's happening. Doctors do not get very far behind. For one thing, they're legally required to take so much continuing education to keep up in the field. And at any rate, one of the things that cognitive psychologists like to point about medical decision making is that there's a right answer and there's a wrong answer, and you'll eventually find out whether the physician got it right or not. So you can look at the physician's thought processes and see if those thought processes led to a correct outcome or an incorrect outcome. So you can see what the problems are in the decision processes and learn a lot about decision making that would be hard to get at otherwise because it's all taking place in there. What he found, or what has been found, what he reported, was that looked at 100 mistakes, 100 incorrect diagnoses, and only 4 of those came about because the doctor didn't know something that he should have known or she should have known. Only 4 out of 100 were what most people think causes doctors to make mistakes, and that is not keeping up with the literature. The others were all logical mistakes is too narrow, and we'll have to wait later in the course here for me to expand on what this is really about. But well, the most common mistake they made was instead of making the decision based on data, they made the decision based on their personal experience. And that's so hard not to do. I mean, everybody makes that mistake. And in study after study after study after study, data-based decisions, if they compare data-based decisions and even professional expert decisions based on experience, the data-based decisions always win. And experts, one of which I am, of sorts, hate that. We just just don't like the idea that data are better at predicting what's going to happen and making decisions than we are. But it happens. It's just true. It's unavoidable. And doctors, in their diagnoses, just can't avoid it. And that's the biggest mistake. That's the biggest source of incorrect diagnosis, is incorrectly relying on experience instead of the data. I'm not saying they don't know about the data. They do. It's just that, I know, I had a woman in here like this 6 months ago. And that's the most common source of medical mistakes. It just now occurred to me, and I forgot to turn on integrity. So somebody stick up your hand and say, hey, you forgot to turn on integrity. Thank you. The reason I couldn't get it on last time directly is that the whole system was down. I don't know how I ever got onto it through a shortcut. Now, this isn't the way I showed you last time, but this is usually the easiest way to do it. Go to myuppa.edu, which we couldn't get to last time, and there's an integrity icon. You just click on that, and it'll take you right to it. I think the microphone went out last time, too, was it?
Yeah.
It wasn't put in the, there's a charger up here, and it wasn't pushed into the charger all the way. That's a recording from last time. There's very little content on it. I'll go back and look at it and see if there's anything we care about. But anyway, what will normally be up here is a list of dates like that, which are the different classes, which are recordings of the different lectures. And I will go through as soon as we have enough to make it worth the effort and give them real titles, so you know how to get to a particular lecture by some means other than just the date. But you don't have any trouble with that. Hello? Okay, coming back to where we were. And again, as somebody did last time, if that stops, that indicates that the system is recording. If that stops happening, you'll know it before I do. So just tell me. Okay, so one of the things things interesting about this book is just this first study I had ever really seen on specifically medical mistakes, medical decision making, and it's pretty good. It's he's a physician, but he really has done his homework on cognitive psych. He knows what he's talking about. It's not just his own intuition. The literature. The thing is, though, he, like most physicians, start wandering off into stories, wandering off into anecdotes instead of talking about the data. And it's not really surprising. I mean, I can take a spreadsheet that represents 50, 60 people, and that's what I work with. The physician has to work with this person right now, make a guess at what's wrong with them and how to fix it. So they have to some extent be oriented toward the individual person, and it's art as much as it is science. But that's I as a gyno-psychologist consider that a weakness. Physicians probably consider it a strength. But anyway, that's in my little review of it. That's a weakness. So he only gets, my rating system only gets 3 out of 5 coveted Aldriches. There was one book that started this, that started the cognitive psychology fad. This was a book called Blink by Malcolm Gladwell. Anybody know about this? It's been a few years since it came out.
I've heard the author.
He's got one out now. I can't remember the title of it. It's about extremes, people who are extremely smart, outliers. Doesn't have anything to do with cognitive psychology, but this one really got people interested in the field. And this is just a quote from the beginning of the book. He starts out making the point that if you read the cognitive psychology literature, you will discover that decisions, snap gut level decisions, can be just as good as decisions that you have to sit there and think out cautiously and deliberately. And the advantage of snap decisions is the main task. Philosophical decisions, mathematical decisions, some logical decisions take a long time. Most of our cognitive processes came into existence while we were running around the plasticine plains with a spear. And if we sat there and said, that very large animal is coming at me with its mouth open, I'll bet it's going to kill me. Well, all the people who thought like that are dead and didn't have any ancestors. We are descended from the people who could say, whoa, and do what's right without thinking. So that's our tendency. Our tendency, we have inherited a lot of tendencies with regard to thinking processes from our ancestors 10,000 years ago who were in a way different world. Happily, they still work for us pretty well, 90% of the time. But when they're wrong, as we'll see, they are really wrong. There are no breaks. A lot of the horrible decisions we make come about from using processes that work really well 90% of the time and are super efficient. Just gut level things like that. It's just that 10% of the time when they don't work, it's not that they don't work just a little bit. They don't work at all and cause us to do crazy things. But I just tell you about things like that at this point, and we'll all through the course get into them at different levels. But anyway, first point he wanted to make was on the importance of unconscious thought, unconscious decision making, which people didn't really realize how much of thought is unconscious until the last few years. People started pointing that out in popular books. Well, then, okay, how do you know if this is one of the 90% chance, one of the 90% of the time that a snap gut level decision is going to work? Or how do you know if this is this is one of the 10 times, 10% of the times I got to really sit and think about this. And he then discusses that too. How do you know when to be careful? How do you know to go gut? And he didn't provide any definitive answers, but just the fact that he was raising these questions made this just a blockbuster bestseller. It's just not the way people thought. It's easy to read. It's written like a magazine article. And, well, as with magazine articles, first 100 pages are a little bit superficial, but it gets at the issues. It's a real issue. It's not bad. However, after the first 100 pages, he just wanders off into fluff, just total speculation, kind of making things up. And so that, to me, really detracted from it. So in my review, he still just gets 3. And that 3 is entirely for the first 100 pages.
I have a question.
Yes.
What would be the highest rating that you'd give a book?
5.
5.
We'll get to 1. a couple of books from now. You won't have ever heard of it. It's totally obscure, but at least I was impressed.
Okay.
This one is just the opposite of blank. This one is by David Myers, who, if you had intro sites here, you probably used Myers' intro textbook. He's a social psychologist. He writes textbooks. He's very prolific, and he's very careful, and he writes very well. That is a paragraph I took out of the beginning of the book. And again, it's this new thing of our minds process vast amounts of information outside of consciousness, beyond language. We just get the end result. There are like machines cranking away inside our brain doing all of these calculations, and they give consciousness the end result, and we then go ahead and act on it. But when you start studying this stuff, there is an awful lot going on. Where not only do we not know what's going on, not only do we not know what is going on, we don't even know that anything is going on. It's just like the answer comes to it. But when you look at it, no. that can't be. The unconscious things are systematic. They're very studyable as long as you don't make the mistake of the consciousness except as an end product. This one, however, is written like a textbook. It's not written like a magazine, which is kind of a consequence of it being so solid. And that's its strength. But as is also the case with most textbooks, the writing style is a little thick, a little heavy for a popular book. But nevertheless, it has just really excellent, very carefully collected experimentation. So
Okay.
There's the 4. We're getting. We're about to do everybody know who this is.
Yeah.
Okay. Stephen Colbert, now the joke is by Colbert. He said, I think maybe this was in a book, but he says it a lot, that you should go by truthiness. He's invented that word. Truthiness means you would like for this to be true, or it feels like this should be true, or this goes along with what I think is true. Just go with that. Don't be misled by books. Don't be misled by thoughts. Don't be misled by logic. Ask yourself, does it feel truthy? And he's saying that as a joke, of course. But there is another guy who wrote but I think is just an excellent book, who says, no, that's what we really do now. That's what people do. They just look at facts and don't even consider logic or bodies of knowledge. They just gut level react. Does this seem truthy to me? And we form belief after belief after belief just on that basis. According to this book, Bharat Manju, he writes for an online magazine on the social implications of technology. And what he says is that people really aren't doing what Colbert says. But then people have always done this. But in the past, we've always had to defend our ideas against people who disagree with them. We have to tell people why we think this. Now, something has happened technologically where we don't have to do that anymore. We don't have to defend our ideas against people who disagree with them. Because now we can associate with other people who think they're truthy also. What does that? What happened to cause that? What happened to keep us from having to defend our ideas against people who don't like them and enable us to associate only with people who feel the same way?
Social networking.
Networking. And then the internet. Just networking in general. Now we can clump ourselves into groups that all feel the same way, and we just resonate off each other. We don't have to defend our ideas. We don't have to argue why we believe them, because all of the people we're associated with electronically feel the same way. So we just sit there, Obama, and everybody we communicate with feels the same way. And so people are drawn to each other with the same gut reaction. They then isolate themselves and never have to think, never have to defend, never have to say why I believe this. And he says his argument is a sense that factual reality matters, or even that there is such a thing as factual reality, is getting lost. It just, his argument is that we've lost all concept of real objective truth, or we're losing it anyway, because we always hang out with people with whom we don't have to defend.
Not only that, but people seem to not store information in their head. They'll go to their phone and be like, I'm going to Google that or wiki that.
That's true. That's true. That's a very good point. It's confirmation bias has always been there. It's like when if you ask somebody how likely something is before it happens, they say, that's not so likely. If something happens and then you say to somebody, how likely would you have been to predict that before it happened? I knew it all along. That's a really powerful effect. If you ask somebody about something that's already happened, they will say, well, I would have predicted that. I knew it all along. But if you ask them the same thing before it happened, they may say, no, that's not going to happen. That's very unlikely. That's called a confirmation bias, where after something happens, you knew all along that would happen. That plays into this, I'm sure, but it's always been around. It's always been a really strong effect. The internet or networking or being able to isolate yourself from people with different opinions just lets that run rampant about everything. And that's kind of his point. Review. His ideas are very creative, very well developed. I've never, a lot of his ideas I've never seen, they're not refinements